What up, world? It's Mac. Tell me something slick and make it stick. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We back. Yeah. Yeah, we back.
Yes,
You
sir.
wanted it. Y'all begged for it. Me and this man broke the damn YouTube. We got people, goddamn, 90% of the people loving what we're saying. 5% of the people don't understand what we're saying. And 5 of them hating on what we're saying.
Oh, yeah.
Get about y'all 5%. No, I got the motherfucking music maven, hip hop savant. He's a national treasure in my eyes when it comes to fucking music and all things hip hop. I got none other than the great B.Cox. We coming back for episode number 2, part 2. Get your shit together.
Yes, sir.
Get your cigar. We're going to be talking about Illmatic some more. We're going to be talking about Ready to Die. We're going to get into Outkast. We might even talk about Lil Jay-Z.
A little bit.
Get ready. We'll be back in a second. Me and my man B.Cox. I'm telling y'all, hit that like button right now. It's going down. Welcome back, yes sir. Folk Classic B.Cox in the building. How you feeling, man?
I'm good, brother Mac. I'm good, man. So glad to be back on Cigar Chats with you here to chop it up once again. Everything went so well from the last time, and the reaction, as you stated, was more than I could ever imagine. I mean, here I am just talking about what I talk about and being here with you, obviously a very good and gracious host and doing what you do. And the output and the reaction has been so good that even I couldn't imagine what it would have turned out to be, man. So I'm grateful to be back here to talk a little bit more about some music, especially hip hop music, and chop it up and see where things go.
All right, man. Well, you already know. Well, listen, I'm going to let you know. Your breakdown of Nasir Jones was one of epic proportion. I have my channel, man. Hey, man, that right there has got so much traction and love, man. People really, man, appreciate that. Now, I'm just going to we talked about Nas's body of work.
Yeah.
And this man know goddamn production, the producers, the linear notes. B.Cox can tell you everything. But B.Cox, we're going to do something a little bit different now.
Okay.
I got to have a little controversy with our guy Nasir, who we both is deemed our number one.
Indeed.
Now, I want to talk about the big boy from Bedford Stuyvesant for a minute.
Okay. All right, let's talk about him.
Now, because I need your savant hat on. I need you to get your maven mind ready. I want us to bust down just to pose. Illmatic, Ready to Die, just to pose to each other. Now, the question I'm asking you, B.Cox.
Okay.
How do you feel? Both of these are lyrical monsters, but the great Biggie Small said, when Nas is in the Listeners Award in the category, I won't be winning that this year. What do you think both of these albums, their impact on our generation and on the game, B.Cox, whichever one you choose to start with first?
Yeah.
I toss it to you.
Well, you know, the funny thing about Illmatic and Ready to Die is they both came out in the same year, 1994. Yes, and if you look at Illmatic being released April 19th, 1994, Ready to Die coming out September 1994, you're looking at a difference of about, let's say, give or take about 5 months, between the two albums. And what is so crazy about both of these albums dropping in the same year, and also the response that they both got, were so very different, considering the fact that Nas and Biggie were on the come up during the exact same time. Think about Nas being on Live in the Barbecue from Main Source's Breaking Atoms. The verse that he said pretty much changed his life, and it did. And Biggie coming up and dropping those first mixtapes with Mr. C and linking up originally with Biggie and being put on the Real Love remix, and dropping party and bullshit right around 92, 93. And during this time is when Nas is starting to craft his rhymes and put together Illmatic.
Yes, sir.
So when 1994 comes around and these albums drop, you have a very different response from the public at large. First, let's talk about hip hop heads.
Okay.
Hip hop heads love both of these albums because if you look at it, they're not really that much different from each other as far as when it comes to the lyrical excellence. So if you also want to talk about where they differ as well is also in the production. You have all the producers we talked about last episode with Illmatic, but then you have the production done by what would be the beginning of Diddy's Hitmen, producing on Ready to Die.
Okay.
The likes of Clark Kent. Also, you had DJ Premier who produced on Ready to Die as well. I mean, run down the list of all the different Lord Finesse who produced on Ready to Die as well.
Yes, sir.
But what you had was a difference in the machine that was behind Biggie versus the machine that was behind Nas.
Come on, talk about that.
So then you also talk about the reception and the music. Now look at the lead singles from both of the albums. The lead single from Illmatic, in most cases, people will probably say was Halftime. It ain't hard to tell. Oh, The World Is Yours. Yeah. You know, they all kind of run as far as like in the similar space between 93 and 94. Those songs come out.
Okay.
Unquestionably, the lead single from Ready to Die is Juicy. And I don't even have to say any more about what that track did for Big in his career. And it was the foresight of Diddy himself to make sure that he had a track in there that Biggie could get that could touch just not the streets he was trying to reach back to, but then also cross over with the folks he was trying to reach on the radio. Because the one thing that I think what folks understood between what was being done with Nas being done versus what was being done with Biggie is that they understood that it was going to be a hard sell to try to get Biggie to become a star in the mainstream because he didn't look like the typical star. You know?
Did not.
Everybody remembers the scene from Notorious when they was like, "Oh man, you found a dude? If he smooth, you know, like LL Cool J. Nah, he don't look like LL.
Yeah.
Like Heavy D, yeah, maybe just a little bit darker, you know." Yeah. So he really is. I mean, the whole thing he talked about some black and nasty, how nasty as ever.
However, though, B.Cox, he stayed coochie down to the socks.
So what you had was really this juxtaposition of Biggie and Nas, really two sides of the same coin. Okay. Both came from the struggle. Both came from infamous hoods in New York City, legendary hoods in New York City that produced many hip hop stars before, from Queensbridge projects and from Bed-Stuy. And what you had was the machine behind Biggie. You just knew how to be able to market him a little bit better. And the songs were finding a way to connect with not just the streets, but then the commercial audience. It was being able to get that play in the radio, right? Not to say that Biggie sold out, because he didn't. Anybody who listened to Ready to Die just knows just how raw, how rugged so much of that album is that didn't show up on the radio. But when it came time to turn on the lights and get you a single on the radio, oh, they knew how to dress the big man up and make him look nice and smooth, you know, without making him lose his edge. And that was the key thing of why Biggie was so successful, because while everybody knew he was a smooth big man, he had his way with the ladies, he did everything. He was, you know, suave, debonair, had the game. People also knew he was from the streets and knew he was about his business. But then you also look at the image that Nas had, and it's sort of like, you know, this prodigy that came from these world famous Queensbridge projects, where it brought the likes of the Juice Crew, Marley Marl, MC Shan, Roxanne Shante, you know, Craig, all these like that this is what his hood helped to produce, that had been on the down slump for some time, really ever since the Bridge Wars ended. You know what I'm saying? And he was sort of like the person to resurrect Queensbridge back and bring back the prestige of this hood that was so prestigious in the 80s when hip hop was starting its rise. And so you had this prodigy, it's Golden Child, like that was, a lot of people said it was lyrically on the same wavelength of the greats that came before him, like Cool G Rap, like Rakim, like Big Daddy Kane. Had the wordplay and everything behind them. The production was great. But for some reason, commercially, it didn't really grab the people like the same way that Ready to Die did. And it was before. So when Illmatic came out, everybody always wondered, oh, well, it took so long to get. Yeah, nobody really grabbed onto it commercially. The heads loved it. But when it came to viability commercially on the radio, you were not hearing Halftime and It Ain't Hard to Tell and The World Is Yours like the way that you were hearing Juicy and Big Papa and Warning and eventually a remix to One More Chance, right? Mm-hmm. That's the differences. But when you look at the albums on their face, really the difference is between Ready to Die is that there were those few gems that they knew how to stick in the crown that would shine the brightest, that would make this thing go from this could be a potentially gold selling album to being a multi-platinum selling album because of the commercial success of these singles and because people will grab onto it because of that. And the success really is what separates Illmatic and Ready to Die. Because to me, there's not a lot of separation between the two, if you think about it.
That's a fact.
No skips for Illmatic to me. I mean, some people will argue about semantics with skips about One Time for Your Mind or other stuff like that. With Biggie, I have heard some people say they don't necessarily care too much for Friend of Mine on Ready to Die. I don't have a problem with it, but they're two albums with no skips, two undeniable classics. The difference is that Diddy and Arista and the people behind the machine of Biggie knew how to market Biggie to the public and get those singles that touched the public, that got them invested in Biggie, and not just Biggie, but his story, right? Mm-hmm. But there was just as a compelling story with Nas on the other side of the coin. Now, for whatever reason, Illmatic only having 10 tracks didn't really have a single that connected with the public like the way that Biggie's did.
It did not.
So unfortunately, what we're left is that you have two great MCs. By the way, in this very interesting atmosphere where New York rap is on its way back to being commercially viable once again nationwide. Because if you look at the early 90s, once you get the development of the Ice Cubes and the DJ Quick,
West, talk to him, B.Cox,
and Dr. Dre and everybody on Death Row.
Yes, sir.
And then just not even them. You can even look at the alternative acts like The Far Side and looking at folks like Souls of Mischief and Hyro and Dale the Funky Homo Sapien and all these acts that emerged from the West Coast during this period from the late 80s into the early 90s that made the West Coast the popular choice of fans when it came to commercially being successful, because that's what people gravitated towards. In 1994, you really start to see the East start to come back with these releases that came out specifically in that year. And it really began, I would say, in the previous year with the release of Black Moon Enter the Stage, Midnight Marauders by Tribe Called Quest, and Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers being released in 5 weeks of each other in 1993. But in 94, the momentum went all the way up with these releases that came out, and Illmatic and Ready to Die were at the forefront of that reemergence of New York rap being commercially viable and successful again. And it was like while they weren't overtaking the West again, they were competitive again. And those were the two soldiers right at the forefront of it. However, one just had a little bit more cachet with the audience. And it was unfortunate because I think if everyone would have been able to, if they would have marketed the story and been able to connect with the single that would have just hit people right in the chest, that people would have been able to recognize Nas's brilliance a lot more earlier than they did. I kind of feel like they didn't recognize the brilliance solely until It Was Written came out and until he had a single that hit like the same way that Juicy did and Big Papa did.
Yes, sir.
You know, with If I Ruled the World. You know?
Long.
You know?
Come on, B.Cox.
So it took some time. So that's the unfortunate part about it. Now, you also look at the juxtaposition between Nas and Biggie, and there's also lots of stories about them during that time. That to me was a fascinating period in hip hop. That time period between 1993 heading into 1994. At this time, you know, Pac had just come out with Strictly for My Niggas. You know, he's out, he's on tour. This famous story about him being at homecoming at Howard and opening up for Pac. He does party and bullshit. And then him and Pac kind of link up for the first time and they hang out. You know, there's a famous video of them sitting at the table smoking and freestyling, Pac and Biggie. Of that famous picture of the two of them sitting there, Pac with his middle finger up, and Biggie sitting there, you know, ice grilled out. And you got the feeling that something is sort of building there.
Yes, sir.
On the periphery of that is Nas, who was also on the come up as well. So there was a point in time when the three of these guys were all conversing with each other, and it was the start of something that you would think would be something great. So you have this move into 1994. Nas even tells a story about how originally Biggie wanted him to get on "Give Me the Loot," which is on "Ready to Die." Incredible song on "Ready to Die," by the way. One of my favorite songs.
Give me the loot.
And it didn't work out, but somehow Biggie wanted to do a remix and wanted to get Nas on the remix. So they were in the studio planning to get and lay it down the night while they're in the studio. Well, word is to Nas, and he said this in a couple of different interviews, is that Big pulled out some chocolate, right? Some stank weed, some chocolate from Brooklyn that he had gotten around the way. Started rolling up something, and they started smoking, and Nas said he was gone. After that, it was no recording happening that night. You know what I'm saying? And then he had also said he had lived in Long Island. He had moved out to Long Island during that time, so he had to get back to the crib. You know, at this point, Nas had a young daughter. He had to take care of business, so he had to peace out and be gone. So "Give Me the Loot" remix never happened. Then you have 1996 roll around, and a number of different things happen where Nas kind of throws in a little bit of a sub disc that could be construed either on the message, or also the affirmative action remix as well, that Biggie didn't take too kindly towards. So Biggie then decided on his next album, on Kicking the Door, that he would not only hit Nas back about that, but so many different other parties, as well as Raekwon and Ghostface, who kind of headed at Biggie on Only Built for Cuban Links, talking shit about Biggie, talking about J. Rue the Damager, talking about the Roots. So he had a lot of people he was coming back on. And then sadly enough, it seemed as though Biggie passed before they really got a chance to sort of mend things up between the two of them. So that story lays out over a few different years. Mind you, both of them are also caught up in the wrath of Pac after the Quad Studio shooting, and then he's convicted and sent to prison. So then when he comes out of prison, two of the biggest targets he has in his crosshairs are Biggie and Nas. Biggie and Nas. And at this point, Biggie has become a big star.
Yep.
Biggie is probably the biggest rapper in the game during this time when Pac comes out and is released out of prison. And Nas is in the midst of a little bit of a style shift from Illmatic.
Okay.
When he talks about he went from Nasty to Nas, from Nas to Escobar, he's in the process of starting this persona change, which would eventually mark what would be his It Was Written era. And so Pac had a lot of stuff to say about both of them, man. So it's interesting that the juxtaposition between the two of them sort of leads them in so many different ways from the start of 1993 all the way leading up to Biggie's death in 1997. And just having those two albums in that year released so close together with each other. And the fact that Biggie's album connected because those singles were able to give him a little bit of an edge in regards to the public is going to grasp on at that time what they hear on the radio. Because that was the success back then.
You had to get radio play.
There was no airplay. To get mixtapes, you literally sometimes had to go out of town to go get mixtapes and hope somebody brought something back so that you can dub something. You wasn't going on to Dat Piff back in 1993 and 1994. There was no livemixtapes.com. None of that.
Come on, talk to him, B.Cox.
So if you didn't have radio play, you weren't having the success. If you weren't having your videos being circulated on any station you could think about, Video Music Box in New York, mainly. I saw the documentary about that. Great documentary. The Box music videos that everybody knows. Music videos you control. BET. Yo MTV Raps. If your video's not getting circulated on there regularly and you don't have the radio play and then the marketing behind it to be able to push your album towards top of the charts, to have those spins on the radio constantly reminding people of your music, your album's not really going to do much numbers. And that's unfortunately the fate that Illmatic served, is that it didn't do very well commercially. It took about 7 years for it to actually reach platinum status, which is blows my mind of an album of that caliber, right? But sometimes, as the way it was back then, there's only room for one king at the top. And so therefore, Biggie was sort of king during that time, and Nas had to wait his turn. And if you talk to some people during that time, Nas really never got his spot as king because there was always somebody there to always take the crown, right?
Mm-hmm.
Always. And so when it would have been natural progression, all right, Biggie gone, so now it's got to be Nas, right? Well, no, so that's the unfortunate part about it. And the other part is that I wish they would have actually gotten to work together, because had we had some prime young hungry Biggie Smalls and prime hungry young Nas on a track together, I don't know what the fuck would have happened. Greatness would have happened is what would have happened,
Great.
but but if you look at the two albums, you can't go wrong with either one. Matter of fact, I had both of them, both tapes, Illmatic and Ready to Die. And I wore both of them out. And you know what? Depending on what mood I was in would depend on which album I would listen to, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I loved one much more than the other, because how can you pick? I mean, you in one type of mood, you're going to want to listen to Ready to Die. You in another type of mood, you're going to want to listen to Illmatic. And really, it's just a matter of it was really two great dishes, but just made by different chefs.
Ooh.
That's it.
B.Cox,
it's a preference, I would say, more so than anything else is what it boiled down to.
Let's play right there for a minute. You alluded to some where I wanted to get to next. Ooh, you talked about Ray and Ghost. Why do you feel like they took a shot at Big when they was kind of, hitting that? Well, they weren't really hitting. They just kind of say, "Hey, niggas bit off Nas album cover."
Nas album cover, yeah,
and things of that nature. Now, that niggas was funny. But my thing is this. I kind of want to make this portion, this segment, I want you to kind of go back a year, B.Cox. You took us in 94. Let's go back to 93.
Yeah.
Does the Whoop and I and the RZA, this is a lot to unpack, but only B.Cox can unpack this the right way. So let me package it up for you if you don't unpack it.
Okay.
The RZA is a genius, in my opinion.
Of course.
The RZA is a mastermind.
Of course.
B.Cox, two questions I'm asking you.
Okay.
Does the RZA get his just due? And two, what were the individual contributions of each of those star players from the Wu-Tang collectively and in the game of hip hop? If you may unpack.
Oh man. Well, does RZA get his just due? I will say, for those of us who knew and were around, yes, he gets his just due. He's on a very short list of producers, probably I would say 10 hip hop producers. When you talk about the best of all time, he's in a very small group of people who are in the consideration for that top 10. And there's very little to no debate about whether or not he belongs in that top 10 either. You could argue with a few people over if you want to put him in over a few other folks, but I think we all know and understand whatever it is that RZA did. When RZA and DJ Premier had their verses, and a lot of people are like on social media, and I love like when they did this shit during verses, and they would say, "Oh, Primo got this shit in the bag," and I'm like, "Yo, all right, so listen, number one, I agree overall, yes, but number two, let's not be so quick to write RZA off, because I don't think y'all understand when he starts pulling shit out of his trick bag, and you're gonna be like, damn, dog, I forgot the RZA actually produced this shit, right?" So as the first half of this versus is going, RZA's kind of getting into Primo's ass a little bit.
He was hitting him with some bangers. Because
in fact, I'll never forget in particular Black Thought, who was a little salty about some shit that Primo had said earlier in the verses about Pharoah Monch, and how he said that Pharoah had some of the best control when it came to his words and breath and everything else. And I think Thought kind of took exception to that shit. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, but in this first half, RZA kind of giving it to Primo a little bit, and Thought's like, "Yo, man, Prim, you need to wake your ass up. This nigga digging in your ass right now, dog. He digging in your shit right now, dog." And I think for the majority of us, we're kind of all thinking that. We was like, okay, so when Primo gonna pull the big jokers out real quick? And eventually he did. Later on in the verse, he started pulling them out. But RZA, it wasn't like he started pulling them out and then RZA didn't have nothing to keep coming with. He still had them joints, man. And so when we talk all the way back, going back to 1993, I did enter the 36 chambers, enter the Wu-Tang 36 chambers for the Vault last year when it came out for 30 years. And I remember going back and listening to that album in full for the first time in probably maybe a couple of years, man. I just sat there in amazement at just like the shit that was happening. And then not only that, because I'm a beat junkie, having produced music myself, I'll always like to go back and jump on Who Sampled, even though a lot of producers don't like that shit. I jumped on whosampled.com to go look and listen to the sample material and where this source material came from for a lot of these beats. And it's incredible the shit that RZA did when he flipped these joints into making these beats, man. Just for Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers. Absolutely incredible. So we talk about, yes, RZA's a genius, even though his cousin actually is the genius.
Is a genius,
but he is a genius.
Yes,
and it was his genius that spurred that early Wu-Tang success from 36 Chambers all the way through to Forever. And then between that is when you have everybody else's contributions happening during that time. So we talk about 93. That's 36 Chambers right there. We'll go ahead and talk about what happened after that. The first album that happens, that drops, is Method Man on Def Jam to Cal. Now, crazy album, right? And crazy album, very raw. And what you get on that album is not what we hear from a lot of that stuff. Like, a lot of people don't know that the All I Need that you hear on the album is not the shit that you get. Now, All I Need on the album don't even have Mary on it.
No, it does not sound the same because
it don't even sound the same. But incredible bangers on that joint. And that's an album from arguably the biggest MC and most famous MC from Wu-Tang Clan, right?
That's a fact.
And many people will tell you that album being released paled in comparison to what would happen later on. So then you move on from 1994 into Cal. You get into the Gravediggers, who RZA was a part of, right? Okay. Very grits group. You're into that horrorcore part thing of rap, talking about all these different things, 5% of Wisdom. Really a niche group that RZA gets in and sort of digs and to sort of get his creative juices flowing. 95 comes around, you get ODB, Return to 36 Chambers, man. Ooh. And the thing is, it's just like this. Everybody sort of looks at ODB and listens, like they look at him as sort of like this whole, I would say, comedic character about things because the way he acted, and he was truly a nigga that was off the hook. When we hear the stories about ODB, about what shit happened back in the day, that nigga was off the hook. But he handled his biz on this Return to 36 Chambers in only his style. Literally doing as only as he can, as he came up with this name, that his style had no father. It was all truly his own.
That's right.
Return to 36 Chambers with some incredible tracks on there. And to me, some of the best producing that RZA has done. But then we get into later on in 1995. And this is where I think RZA truly earns his genius. Raekwon, The Purple Tape.
Man.
Officially titled Only Built for Cuban Links.
Come on,
Ghostface Killers. I mean, listen, we did a ranking of albums from 1995, and you got to understand also as well what came out in 1995. We're talking about AZ Do or Die, East 1999, A Turtle with Bone Thugs and Harmony, The Infamous by Mobb Deep.
Yes, sir.
All these different albums that came out in 1995, and to me, the best one of that year was Liquid Swords, which I'm going to get to in a second.
Please, we're not going to leave the jizz out. We're not going to leave Liquid Swords out.
The best one out of all of them to me was The Purple Tape, man. You want to talk about really some of the like production wise and vision wise, what RZA helped to build with this album that Raekwon put out, knowing that he was one of the assassins that he had in his crew, the chief assassins he had in his crew, and then be able to take a guy like Ghostface and integrate him into this album and to have them absolutely kill it. An album that is so legendary now that it has that nickname of The Purple Tape because of the color of the tape, but because of the quality of it. It's an album that almost 30 years later, we're still playing it like it came out yesterday. And those beats on there, those beats for Ice Cream and Incarcerated Faces,
The video for Ice Cream, I still get excited about B.Cox.
Yeah, verbal intercourse, with
Nas
yes.
on there. Mm-hmm.
I mean, just excellence. Fall of 1995, you get into Jizza Liquid Swords, which if you talk to many Wu heads and hip hop heads, may be some of the favorite work by some of those diehard hip hop and Wu fans is Liquid Swords. Jizza in his lyrical mastery, right? The metaphors, the imagery, and that production. I mean,
shadow boxing with him and Meth.
Shadow boxing, Cold World, Fourth Chamber. I mean, just thinking about it, just at times I sit there and think, and we talk about like there are times when you have what they call cold weather albums. Jizz's Liquid Swords is a cold weather album. It speaks vintage, early 90s New York in the dead of winter, December night. You know, I'm talking about Eddie Bauer, bubble coat, Tim Duck, you know what I'm saying? Thermal shirt underneath, like that type of cold weather. It has that type of feeling to it.
Okay.
So we're in this whole run, 1996. Ghostface Iron Man drops, you know?
Uh-oh.
The first one in the Ghostface trilogy I like to call in excellence. And Iron Man, a crazy album. I mean, then you get to see Ghostface, who showed his thing on 36 Chambers, but really got his man on the Purple Tape the year before. Then he has Raekwon come to support him on his album. And then you have Capadonna coming to also as well. Winter Wars, All That I Got Is You.
Ooh, with Mary on that.
Yeah, Kimay. I mean, come on, dog. Like, there's some tracks on Iron Man that's some of my favorite Ghostface tracks of all time. And so you get into that, and that sort of leads right into 1997 and Forever, you know? And Forever is the second Wu-Tang album. That's the double disc, an album that helped to popularize not just double disc albums because they had come out, but then also there was the ones that had the multimedia by having the exclusive content, being able to download stuff when you put it into your CD-ROM. It gave you extra content on there, you know? And so that little run between 93 and 97, I ran down how many classic albums? Lots of them. Way too many for them for me to count.
Yes, sir.
So here's the scary part about this whole thing, right? Because after 97, RZA stopped producing the Wu projects and he started going into other ventures, i.e. doing house, you know, Ghost Dog, producing the score for that, other projects. And you could tell that the projects of the Wu members afterwards suffered. Method Man, second release, not as good. Raekwon, second release, not as good. You know? So you had some between 98 and 2000, some not so good work come out. But then the reason also why that happened is because of the flood in RZA's basement. That happened in the mid 90s, where the flood in RZA's basement ended up destroying albums and music and beats mostly that were on floppy disk that were destroyed. Some say it was 200 beats, some say it was 300, some say it was even as much as 500 beats. But the biggest casualty of RZA's basement flood was Inspector Deck, because they were crafting Inspector Deck's solo album and it was all lost to the flood. So when they came out with Uncontrolled Substance in 1999, it was a solid album, but for Deck's capability, it was not the album that we were expecting or the album that he should have had.
Come on.
Because I'll tell you this, right? I'm gonna go out here to say this on the limb.
Say it.
Purple Tape, Iron Man, Liquid Swords, to Cal. If Deck gets a properly produced RZA album, it might have been better than all of them. And that's just in my opinion.
Well, B.Cox, if anybody listened to that song Triumph and Deck kick it off, atomically, man, Socrates' philosophies, stop.
But that was Deck the entire Forever, for real. I tell people when I did my Forever review a couple of years ago, he was the MVP of Forever to me. He was. And that wasn't the only time the Deck let off a verse. Deck let off plenty of different verses on the Wu-Tang projects and killed it every single time that he was on there. I call Deck the Ricky Henderson of hip hop, leading shit off and killing shit every time he go up. Every single time he goes up. So that's why if we would have had a properly produced RZA album pre-flood with Deck on it, I honestly say, it might have been up there where Purple Tape was one of the best Wu solo releases. It might have been, because we knew what Deck was capable of. We knew Deck could rip up a goddamn song with 3/16 or whatever kind of verse structure you wanted to do. He was going to fucking kill it. And then that flood fucked everything up. And it fucked shit up for a lot of different albums too, because there were a lot of stuff that would have gone on some of those albums we just named and some of the ones even afterwards that we didn't even get. Hell, Supreme Clientele had beats that probably would have been on that album that were not on that album. And look at how it still ended up turning out. So that RZA flood in his basement, man, really is something that I see stop and think about. One of the biggest what ifs, and that is the biggest casualty was Deck's solo album. Is had we had gotten the RZA production we should have gotten, I think would have been up there with Purple Tape as one of the best Wusa releases out there. Really.
B.Cox, and this is all speculative. We can always. This is just an imaginative conversation.
Mm-hmm.
How impactful do you feel? And again, we can't really quantify it,
Mm-hmm.
but we can just imagine the demise of ODB impacted the Wu and because he didn't get he was in jail. He didn't get much on that Forever album. He didn't get a lot of shining. Nigga, hell, he was locked up.
Yeah, yeah.
His demise, and I know he was going to go on Rockefeller, and we're gonna get to the boys of Rockefeller in a little bit. We'll get over
Yeah.
there. We're making our way over there, people.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel ODB's demise impacted the Wu as a unit together and what they probably would have did had ODB still been pushing? Because he was Wu, he loved the Wu.
Yeah, he did. And the thing is that, man, Old Dirty's demise, whether it was be through the problems that he had being in jail and then eventually his death in '04, I think his demise, if anything, I thought it kind of took the heart and soul out of Wu, to be quite honest, man. Because RZA was the engine. He was the CEO. He was this quarterback, that sort of
the mastermind. Yeah.
So we talk about like the person that serves as sort of like the emotional leader in the clubhouse, the person that is this person that everybody sort of has that relationship with, the person that is gung ho and die hard about it and get your ass fired up to do some shit was Old Dirty Bastard. You know,
he the Cliff Leviston on the Bulls back at that. He the Cliff Leviston. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. And the thing about it is that when he left, man, and he had his demise, I think it hurt every single one of them in different ways. And the group wasn't the same afterwards when he was gone, because you felt like there was a really big part of Wu-Tang that was missing, that you just can't easily plug somebody in and be like, all right, boom, here, you in there, and that's it. It's like, nah, it's a place of Wu-Tang that can't be replaced. And so when he was gone, I can't help to think that the momentum sort of derailed a little bit. Okay. And also, I would think, man, probably it had to affect them enough emotionally where musically they probably weren't all in it all together. And then, to be quite honest, when you see one of your best friends that you grow up with, you get rich with, you become famous with, go through all these struggles and eventually meet their demise and die, you sort of start to think about your own mortality after a while. And I can't help that they didn't. And I think some of them were like, yo, let's maybe see what I could do a little bit on this solo tip, because I want us to make sure that I can fulfill all of my capabilities and what my potential is before I leave this earth, you know, because he had a lot more to give. Despite all of his antics and everything else that happened, and the fact that he was a pain in the ass for a lot of people to deal with, he had a lot to give, and there was a lot more left. But the problem is when you have to deal with the demons and deal with the, problems, you can't get past over some things, and you sort of get in your own way. That's what happens when, and then when you eventually die, man, you can't help but sit there and think like, man, this brother would have just had his shit together, man. There's no telling what the fuck he might have been able to do. But when you lose that emotional leader, that part, it's like the heart, and that's gone. You can't just replace the heart that easily. You just can't be like, all right, bam, we got somebody else in, you taking his place. Like, nah, dog, you don't replace the ODB, dog. Even if he wasn't lyrically the most skilled person in the world, like I said, he was the person to run down on the court and play defense, dive after balls.
Yeah, he was.
Crowd and save the ball from going out of bounds.
Yeah, he was.
Being a forcer if he needed to push somebody on defense who's fucking up with the star player. That's the type of chemistry that he brought to Wu-Tang, even if he was a disruptor, even if he wasn't on time for shit. But when it came down to the get down, he was there to support damn near everybody's shit. You know what I'm saying? And you could tell just how much he means to them based off of everything they done since then, since he's been gone, man. So absolutely, it played a role in them taking steps down as a group and a collective. You could tell that things were not the same after forever for that group when they put out their other releases. You could tell.
Well said, B.Cox. Now, let's go down the street, B.Cox. We're gonna drive up the road a little bit, knock on the doors to Rockefeller.
Okay.
Now, B.Cox around this time, 96, Pac is in his apex. You got Of course, you got All Eyes on Me, Biggs in Full Throne. We already know what happened to Nas. We know Nas is, he figuring it out. He's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Now we got Sean Carter. We got Jay-Z.
Okay.
B.Cox. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people feel, and I am a part of that majority. I will say this. Now, I'm not taking nothing from Jay-Z. Jay-Z he's a gifted artist.
Mm-hmm.
But when Pac and Big demise,
Mm-hmm.
they left a void.
Yeah.
Now, nobody can tell me that, hey, it would be quite the same if them two entities were still here.
Yeah. Sure.
Because
Mm-hmm.
what do you feel when you think about Reasonable Doubt, that being, certified as a classic album and acclaimed?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that album, but then let's expand to Jay-Z's legacy and contribution to hip hop. But I noticed he's neither one of us. He's not in our. We didn't name him in our top two, top three. Not that I know it. He's not. So
Yeah.
let's kind
Mm-hmm.
of expound on that. And what is it about it that maybe didn't? Why he's not on your Mount Rushmore of the top three of all time? Because
Well, let me just say this.
that's a lot to unpack. But go ahead.
It is. So when Reasonable Doubt dropped, Jay dropped it, and he dropped it at a time in the age when he was older than most people dropped their debut album in hip hop back in the day. He was 26 when he dropped Reasonable Doubt.
Yeah.
But he had been in the game for a while.
Okay.
And he had, been and came up with Jazzo and was sort of his sidekick for a long time, but then started to get his props and his chops with performing around the city. And, eventually, but even before the Reasonable Doubt comes out, like the tastemakers in New York knew who Jay was.
Okay.
And the rest of us got introduced to him through Reasonable Doubt. And, unfortunately in 96, what happens is that he sort of gets a little bit lost in the traffic of the incredibleness that year was. But he drops that album during the summertime, and it definitely does some numbers, but people were impressed, but I don't think they were necessarily as impressed as they would. Because like you said, at the top of the game were Pac and Big, and Nas at this time released his second album, was wildly successful, had one of the biggest songs that summer.
Yes, sir.
So he kind of gets lost a little bit in the shuffle. While people know about him, he's sort of like a third or fourth option at that time, even a fifth option in some cases, if you want to be honest.
Fifth option, you're right at that time.
Because let's be real. I mean, I was around during that time. I mean, I was in high school. Like, people were not checking for Jay like that back then. And Reasonable Doubt, people listened to it and thought it was good, but they don't think it was great like the way we think it's great now.
Correct.
So when Pac and Big both passed away, and yes, so nobody's doubting what Jay would have become eventually afterwards. I think he still would have been what he is now. The trajectory would have been, as far as skill-wise, would have been the same.
Okay.
But I'm not saying that. We know that.
We know that.
But you have to be a fool to not recognize that the void that was left there definitely aided in his commercial success eventually.
Thank you.
Then also he adopted a formula that worked for him, right? He became the persona truly embodied of what we figured out what Jay-Z would be, the Jigga, eventually to start off, eventually Hova. He understood eventually what it was he needed to do to sell himself to the game, to the public, to media, and he mastered that. I mean, we talk about his legacy overall and what it led to. I mean, we're talking about the end of the decade. By the time the end of the decade comes around, he has released his third album, which is still his best-selling album to date, Volume 2.
Yes, sir.
He comes out with Volume 3, which makes him an even bigger star. By the time Rock La Familia drops in 2000, he's the biggest star in the game at that point in time, but in a very competitive industry, by the way, still.
DMX was out there. Don't forget, DMX was doing his thing.
DMX was out there. Ja Rule was still, and Murder Inc. was wildly popular during that time. Nelly was out and around. Country Grammar dropped in 2000 during that. It was a competitive marketplace, but Jay was out there, and he was in the midst of building not just himself as a brand, but Rockefeller as a brand. Because then by the time the rest of the decade rolled around, the 2000s, Rockefeller was not just Jay. It was Memphis Bleak. It was Beanie Siegel. It was State Property. It was eventually Diplomats.
Yeah.
Kanye West. So what Jay's legacy in hip hop to me overall is exactly what he told us so many years ago, is that he wasn't a businessman. He was a businessman. Let me handle my business. Damn. what he mastered was he, along with a few others during that time, found out how to be able to leverage himself as a brand. You taking all of his accomplishments, all the accolades and everything, turned that into a mountain of different opportunities that came his way afterwards, right?
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, what those mountain of opportunities did was lead basically to the demise of his greatest creation, which was Rockefeller, you know, because then at some point in time, Jay became way too big for the little pond to be around with his buddies, you know, with Dame and with Biggs. He felt as though he needed more at that time. Let's call it is for what it is. He did. And when you get to a certain point where you feel like somebody's holding you back, you're going to want to go ahead and go to bigger oceans. You know, you're going to want to. When you're in the tank and you feel like the tank can't hold you no more, you got to jump out that tank and jump in the bigger pond or go to the river to get out to the ocean. So what his legacy is that he found a way to leverage himself as a brand and to leverage his record label and company as a brand that became a lifestyle for so many people. Because when Rockefeller was in his prime, I'm in college, so I see it clearly, right? What he has become, the sayings, like the quotables, the brands, Rockaware, Armadale, and you know, all these different brands that he partners with, it becomes a big deal. The shoes, the S. Dot Carters for Reebok, you know, he found a way to leverage himself as a brand and to make it become so many different other things. It's sort of like the hustle mentality, right? You get a quarter, turn it into a half, turn a half into a pound, turn a pound into 2 pounds, 2 pounds into 4 pounds. It's the same philosophy. And he used that to his advantage when he was in the music industry by being able to push his product, which was then not just music, but the lifestyle, the fashion, the moxie, the personality, all that shit out there. And his legacy, though, also is being able to continue to surprise as a wordsmith and as one of the best rappers out there, despite all those things that we say. Now, as I say that he took advantage of a void, yeah, but let's not forget the fact that how supremely skilled the MC that Jay is. I mean, the fact that he stopped writing shit down and started coming up with them in his head, and this could spit it a lot of times in one take and do songs like that. I mean, where the fuck you think Wayne got it from? I mean, the fact that he could create songs on the spot, most of the times in one take, the fact that he became a wordsmith where the double and triple entendres and stuff that will stop and make you think, and the lines that to now, almost 20, 25, 30 years later, we're listening to some of those lines and being like, damn, how in the fuck did he come up with that shit? And so you think about that period between 96 and 03, between Reasonable Doubt and the Black Album, it is a meteoric rise from somebody that was an afterthought in 96, to be quite honest.
It was.
To being somebody that in 03, we couldn't understand why the fuck he was retiring.
We were like, no, you can't retire with the Black Album. What you mean you gonna fade to the black? Fuck you talking about?
Exactly. And so by the time the Black Album drops, his legacy at that point is already secure. I mean, he's already released, to my count, surefire 3 classic albums, 2 other albums you can probably consider to being close to classics. And he's built an empire that, for real, from where it started to where it became, I mean, it's the classic American success story, right? That's the thing that I think a lot of folks fell in love with when it came to Jay, because he basically came from nothing and found that hustler mentality and found a way to make it work. You know, then he decides he wants to go, you know, be president of Def Jam and everything else, but he doesn't stay retired for that long. But then he comes back and he starts releasing more music. Now, the music post-retirement, it's a mixed bag of results. Let's be honest, right? I mean, he still has a lot of verses on those albums and on features that he killed throughout that time. I mean, the joint album Watch the Throne with Kanye and, you know, all the different projects he was involved in, the albums that he came out with, a little bit of a mixed bag. But then also what happens is that he becomes this mogul during this period after he comes back from his retirement. Right. And he builds that brand, one, by marrying one of the top women artists of the game and the best artists of her generation. They form and become a power couple. He aligns himself with the right people, with the right businesses, and always finds himself in the room to be able to take that next step up. And what happens now is we're at the point now where the brothers are worth well over $1 billion. And you look at him and see what it is that he's accomplished, and it's like, okay, we would have been good after the Black Album, but now, sir, you've just made it not just about your music. You've completely made your legacy on everything that you've built from the ground up to where you are right now. So, what is his legacy overall? His legacy overall is he told us that he wasn't a businessman. He's a business man. He is. And he made himself that. So when you see a guy now worth well over $1 billion, people can sit there and talk about, oh, there's like a video out there that says, you know, hey, if any point in time when Jay was out between 96 and 03, he was never considered the best rapper in the game. And if you stop and think about it, you could make an argument, but you're not having a conversation about hip hop between those years without him, at least in your top three.
That's fair.
At least in your top three.
That's fair.
You know, yeah. And if nothing else, what he has on his side is he found a way to do the numbers, right? And he did the numbers and kept the numbers consistent. And if nothing else, what he was going to do, he was going to sell. And the quality of his work during that time period between 96 and 03 wasn't going to drop that much. As a matter of fact, it was excellent between 2000 and 03. Save for a Blueprint 2. Some mixed stuff on there too. But anyway, but his legacy is the fact that, man, he told us that he wasn't a businessman, that he's a businessman, and he wanted to handle his business, and he did. And so beyond just being an incredible MC that most people would, I mean, you gotta, don't care what you say. For most people, even depending on regionally, wherever you come from, man, you have to have him at least, mostly in your top 5 and definitely within your top 10, right?
Definitely.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, he's my top 5. I mean,
he's my top 5 too. I got him in spot. He's top 5. I ain't my top 3, B.Cox, but he's definitely top 5. It's almost our generation. It's almost criminal not to put him in the top 5.
I mean, I'm mostly a Nas fan, so it's like, you know. But I also listened to Jay and Reasonable Doubt, and I was the one telling people like, "Yo, y'all need to get on this shit." Back in '96, I was telling people that, and niggas looked at me like I had 2 heads. So I'm like, all right, y'all gonna catch up eventually, and they did.
They did. B.Cox, this is we're looking from the outside in. Why do you think Dame is so bitter? Do you think that he got done wrong? I mean,
why is Dave so bitter?
I mean, that's a loaded. Again, we can only. This is only just speculation, conjecture. But I'm like, dude, did you? Because he's not talking about you, but Dame keeps talking about him. I'm like, man, did he do this dude wrong? I mean, I'm confused. So, what's your take, B.Cox?
My take is this: one, I think there's 2 reasons why Dame is bitter. And let me just say this, right? From a certain perspective, I can see where Dame's coming from. Okay.
Break it down.
Dame and Jay started this with Biggs, and they started this literally with just a little bit of whatever it is that they had to try to make something because they wanted to make their own way. They wanted to have their own thing. They wanted to make sure that they built something that was truly something that would be great. And they achieved that.
Yeah.
But what I think what happens is, like, when you talk about eventually you outgrow your friends in life. And I think that Jay at a certain point in time wanted to move at a different speed or travel a different route than Dame did. And Dame was like, nah, we good. I'm good with what it is we got right here. Let's keep riding this wave. You know what I'm saying? Until the wave run out. And then whatever that's done, we do the next thing because we're going to do it together. So why is Dame so bitter? 2 reasons, I think.
Talk to him, because
I think Dame is bitter, one, because he never, I guess truly in his mind, he never thought Jay would do him like the way that he did. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Choke No Joke documentary of Rockefeller, Death of a Dynasty, when they showed the final days of everything going through, had it leading into the Black Album, where Dame rolled up in the Def Jam office because one of his folks got a message about, Def Jam doing promotion for the Black Album leading into the Jay's last album.
Right.
And they called the meeting and nobody told him about it. Right. And when you see Dame go off on these people in this meeting room, you could see that he's legitimately incensed. Yeah. Like, with everything that's going on. He's going on like, y'all have a meeting here about my artists. Y'all have no meetings with no Rockefeller artists without me or nobody from my team. He's going off on them. He keeps asking the question, who called the meeting? Who called the meeting? Well, quiet as kept, Jay called the meeting. I think And so later on in that scene, he comes to the realization when somebody tells him about something with Jay doing what he was doing that weekend. And then eventually he said, yo, all right, so what was that again? He said, hold on, yo, turn that off. And the camera cuts to black. But you could tell he was legitimately upset because he didn't think Jay would do him like that. And I guess he felt like it was a little bit of a snake move that Jay kind of decided to move in the direction he was going. And he was leaving Rockefeller. He was going to take the presidency of Def Jam. And he wanted to go and start his own thing because he kind of didn't, with the way that him and Dame was moving, Dame was like, you're not moving fast for me. You're fast enough for me. You know what I'm saying? You going around and you moving in a way that I don't necessarily like. So I'm going to peace out and go over here and do my own thing. The other reason I think why Dame is bitter is because Dame saw how big it became and knew that if they would have talked and been able to work it out, they could have done it together, right? Because I think that's what was Dame's mentality the whole time going into this.
Right.
Dame always like, it's going to be us together. We built this. We're going to continue to sustain it. We're going to build this empire and make it into something great. But Jay's, like you said, Jay's about his business. And so when it comes to stuff like that, in the word of business, loyalty really means nothing, right?
It ain't personal. It's business.
And it's business. And so when you have one person that's operating it sort of in the means of we're boys, another one operating in the vein of, hey, man, we're partners. And if I'm not happy, I'm going to go somewhere else. That's when you get somebody that's bitter, right? Because there was one thing for one person, but something else for somebody else, different,
But in fairness to Jay-Z, they didn't grow up in the Sandlot together. They did. I mean, that's not Tata. That's not Emery. That's not the guys that he was in the Sandlot with.
You're right. They weren't. Yeah, they weren't. But they did make it out of the dirt together because they basically built the thing from the ground up, with just their connections, who they knew and them really making what it is they knew how to do it in their way. They made Rockefeller what it was with Biggs. They built that shit literally from nothing. And, because they were at the point where they had reached this level of success where they were so big, that's why I think Dame sort of was like, yo, like, well, nigga, what the fuck are you doing? Like, yo, you leaving now? like
now?
Okay, this is gonna be your last album. Cool. But you leaving this Rockefeller shit, you don't like now you don't want to fuck with me no more after all this shit. As big as this shit has gotten, now you want to fucking leave and go do something else. So in that respect, I can see why Dame was a little mad.
Playing devil's advocate. Now in Dame's defense, it's almost like he kicked in doors with his, being aggressive because that's his personality. Dame cussed a lot of people out, and he paved the, he made a way for Jay-Z. He paved the hole for him.
He did.
And Jay-Z was able to stay the nice guy, the good guy.
Yeah.
And Dame was the notorious asshole, which at that time you had to be.
Had to be an asshole. He had to be the asshole, though.
You had to be the asshole to get shit done.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now you get to this room, Kevin Lyles, Lyric Cohen. Now it's like, hey, man, hey, leave the asshole. You come with us.
Yeah. And I can't help that Kevin, to a lesser extent, but Leor, to a certain extent, was kind of in this dude's ear. Like, man, you think this shit big? I can take you to a whole nother stratosphere. You just come into this room with me, bro. And I can show you exactly how big this shit gets. And so I wouldn't put it past him being like, all right, man, well, fuck this shit. I'm out. Like,
hey, man, big guy. Deuces, bro. I gotta go.
Yeah. And so a lot of people say they'll well, Dame, he better, but like, I could see it. If you building something and you think you have an understanding of somebody that y'all are building something and this is going to be it, and they like kind of moving in the background behind your back, not really letting you know what's going on. Yeah. I can see how you would feel hurt about that, but I mean, shit, it's been more than 20 years now. And so Dame's still kind of still holding on, but I think I can understand why, because you see how big the shit got without him being there, and the fact that Jay kind of found a way to stick it to him on record a couple of different times, like you said on,
made a hole, go make another hole.
Yeah, but not only that, when he said, people said I wouldn't last without old buddy, what I did was make more money.
Oh, that was some asshole type shit. B.Cox, all right, man.
Yeah,
Do we got time to take a trip to California real quick?
absolutely.
The impact of the Chronic album. B.Cox, sonically. To
Yeah.
this day, I don't give a I gotta do a twofold, B.Cox.
Okay.
Because I'm not gonna let people
Mm-hmm.
omit this man from his legacy. We're gonna get to the greatness of Dr. Dre, but B.Cox, we gotta talk about, regardless of how he did it, what he did. You cannot, you got to put Mary and Suge Knight on the Mount Rushmore of the West Coast for what he did in the AA and the movement he made. B.Cox, do you think had he not got too much caught up with the ignorant shit from the streets, do you think that Suge would have been no doubt the biggest music impresario of all time? That is 1A. And 2, the impact of the Chronic and sonically, your feel on it and we go with it from there. B.Cox, go ahead.
I mean, obviously, it's a question that you want to stop and think about. And despite all the things that have happened with Suge, it's a laundry list of things that have happened. Had they been able to keep their nose clean and stay out of the gangster shit and not fuck around and do things like get yourself locked up and have the feds raid your office and everything else, honestly, Death Row would have been probably the biggest rap label ever because
that's what I'm going.
They had the star power. They had the work ethic of the people driving the machine.
Come on now.
And they had the streets, they had the clubs, and they had the people.
Come on, B.
From California all the way over to the East Coast. Like I said, there was a period of time when the Death Row ran shit for about 2.5, 3 years. Honestly, you could say they ran shit for about 4 to 5 years.
You give them a 5-year run, B.Cox, about a half a decade.
So
you give them a 5-year run.
I mean, when you and then we talked about this in the last episode after this recording, we talked about I did Above the Rim at 30 years, and that was a soundtrack released on Death Row. Here's an album here's a movie that's produced entirely in New York, based in Harlem, that has a Death Row soundtrack that has mostly Death Row and West Coast artists for a movie that's set in New York. But it worked. It worked because the soundtrack is banging. It's one of the best hip hop soundtracks of all time, probably the best by a lot of people's standards. But if you look at the success that they had, right? What type of output they were putting out in regards to the music that came out on Death Row Records, the people that they produced, the music and hits that they were producing during that time, and the success that they had, it would have been the biggest label out there. They would have outlasted everybody had they just been able to keep their nose clean with everything. I mean, when you look at the success of what happened between the Chronic and I want to say even through All Eyes on Me or Machiavelli, it was ridiculous, man. Some type of numbers that only some rap labels would imagine of doing. And they really captured the sensibilities of just not everybody on the West Coast, but everybody nation and worldwide. I mean, if they would have been able to maintain it, they probably would have been the biggest rap label ever. I mean, let's be honest about it, because they were doing the numbers to support that argument. And the quality of the music's backed it up as well.
Come on, B.Cox.
Everything been able to stay where it was had Suge not lunched out and made Dre not want to leave and fucking go start his own thing. They probably would have built an empire that never would have crumbled. Pac might still be alive. Snoop might still be putting out classic music on Death Row. I mean, there's just so many different things that we talk about that could have happened there. I mean, it was the recipe of all the perfect storms coming together to make Death Row a powerhouse. And it lasted for relatively a short amount of time before all the bullshit started kicking in. Really. I mean, it would have been monumental. It would have been incredible what they could have done had they been able to keep their focus and their eyes on the prize.
Sonically, the Chronic.
Yeah. I mean, what else can you say? No, it set a standard that this 30 years, something years later, people are still trying to reach. It sonically set a standard that people are still trying to reach that level of excellence as far as sonic quality is concerned, almost 30 years later. And that's amazing to think about the advancements in audio technology and what has happened with how we can create music. Nothing still beats that sound. Nothing beats the feeling of when you turn that chronic music on and have it coming through your speaker, the highs and the lows, the bass frequencies, the samples, to be able to hear those mini moogs and those synthesizers and the strings and just everything that you could think about when you talk about the chronic. 30 something years later, it's a standard we're still trying to get to. There are not many albums in any genre that sonically can match up with that album. Okay. And so when you talk about the impact of the chronic is what made Death Row. I mean, the chronic made Suge Knight a millionaire. The chronic made Suge Knight, the chronic made Snoop Dogg eventually become an icon, not just in hip-hop culture and popular culture and American culture and mainstream culture. It all started right there with the chronic. The chronic is the work and realization that we understand of what we would have gotten had we been able to get a full strength and a healthy DOC. Ooh. If we would have been able to get that. But his work and being able to write for the chronic and write on the chronic, ooh, I mean, absolutely crazy. Like absolutely insane what would have happened. And then not only that, man, but when you listen to the chronic now, it's almost like you think about like if you were to watch somebody and like if someone driving a car, like a classic car, like back in 92, 93, like maybe like a Deuce and a Quarter, Chevy Impala, whatever, something like that. But knowing that the cars don't have the technology that they have today. Yes, sir. But just knowing looking at that classic car, and it's just some shit that classic car can do that these souped up cars and machines we got nowadays can't even dream about doing.
Yes, sir.
What those cars did. And that's exactly what the Chronic is. It's a classic vehicle. It's a classic vehicle that without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, that you could put it up against anything today and you could be in like, you know what, that's good, but that right there, that's classic. That right there will never go out of style. That right there, you can drive for years and it will last. That's what the Chronic is. I mean, and let's not even talk about like, lyrically, it's not the most adept album there, but it didn't need to be. The Chronic helped people want to be on the West Coast because those songs, that soundtrack, the visuals you got from those videos, like you wanted to be in California. That's what it did for me.
Me too, bro.
That's what it did for me. I was like, well, shit, when am I going to be at one of these pool parties where Young gets her top snatched off and all of a sudden them titties is out and everything and shit loud off.
Popping around, ready to rap.
Right. Crazy, man. That's the impact that it had, man. The Chronic helped to really bring, along with some other people during that time period, man, helped to bring weed into hip hop culture and make it popular. Along with acts like Cypress Hill and Snoop and Pharcyde and a couple other people from the West Coast helped to make it popular. Became a part literally of West Coast culture. The Chronic became a staple in West Coast culture overall. And that eventually just made it explode over the years and has made it really a staple, man. You can't talk about the history of West Coast hip hop without the Chronic. It's one of the, I would say, 5 pillar albums in West Coast hip hop history that you can't have the conversation, and you got to start at least with those albums.
B.Cox, can we call Dre the greatest producer even though he's not prolific? Is it fair to call him the greatest producer in hip hop if he's not prolific? He's not prolific. He's phenomenal quality, but he ain't prolific.
Right.
Is it fair, B.Cox, to call Dre? How do you feel when they label him the greatest producer in hip hop history?
So I think we also need to understand, as far as when it comes to producing songs, it's just not beyond. It's beyond just making the beats. By the way, right? When you're talking about a producer, you're talking about somebody that may or may not make the beat himself, but lays out the composition of the song, lays out the flesh and idea of what a song becomes, lays out how the song sounds, what parts go where, how to do this, how to say this line. If you're going to bring in a bridge, this bridge needs to go here. And that's really at the what a producer does. A producer takes the direction of a song and makes it a living and breathing thing, even if he doesn't necessarily do the beat that the song is heard over.
Okay.
And in that respect, if you're talking about where you're saying that he's not prolific, and also if we talk about output wise, in the last 25 years, he hasn't really produced much, you know,
No.
not that he's needed to as well either, though. So let me just say this: when we say that Dre is one of the greatest, and I'll say for me, he's like one A, 1B with me. And when it comes to hip hop producers, and DJ Premier is like the other one of that side of 1A, 1B.
Okay.
And the respect that how Dre is a producer, the same way you would look at a great executive chef at a restaurant. Executive chef is not cooking many of the dishes himself, but he's managing the kitchen. He's looking at the quality of everything, how it's being done. He's making sure that everything goes out in the order that it needs to go out, that food quality is done well, that something isn't missed on plates, that the kitchen is running in an efficient manner, and that everything's in tip-top shape. Dre has done that as good, if not better, than so many different other people in his genre in hip-hop. In that respect, he's almost akin to a Quincy Jones, to in that respect, as far as when he talks about how you manage the pieces of everything in the studio during the recording project, right?
Okay.
That's to me, he's more or like Quincy Jones than anybody else, I would say, in hip hop, because of the way that he manages the recording process and how he drives the direction of not just songs, but albums. So when we talk about Dr. Dre being executive producer, yeah, Daz, you may have made some beats, and yeah, DJ Battlecat, you may have made some beats, and other producers may have made beats, just like whatever. But this meal is not going out of the kitchen until Dre makes sure that shit is the way he wants it to be.
That's a fact.
So beyond the output, beyond the fact that, oh, well, you know, Daz made this many beats of this and other producers this and do that and everything, Dre is gotten the opportunity, gotten the reputation that he has is because he is an executive chef that puts out the best goddamn meal that becomes an experience.
Only B.Cox.
And listen, not many producers can do that, can manage the project from beginning to end like that. That's where his greatness comes in, truly. And knowing your people and understanding how to manage that process is a part of it as well.
B.Cox, stay right there. Dre just opposed to Timbo. What's the difference?
Wow. Well, stylistically, not really a lot. I mean, the beats sound different, right?
Yeah.
But the process is just about the same. The only difference between Dre and Timbo is that, and I've watched videos of Timbo producing in the studio.
Okay.
His process for coming and thinking up with beats, and I even like saw a clip of the master class producing class that he gave.
Okay.
He is so involved with his process for creating is so out of this world when it comes to the sounds that he makes, the instruments and patches that he uses, the equipment that he uses, what sounds where is incredible. So if we talk about how Dre's output has not been as great as far as when it comes to producing beat, Timbo's the opposite side of that, right?
Prolific.
It's prolific, right? When it comes to beats, producing music, that is prolific.
Yes, sir.
So when his creation, I would say, is on par with Dre in regards to him coming up with it, right?
Okay.
Like Dre will work on arranging the strings and will get the string players to play the arrangement the way he wants them to play.
Okay.
Tim will think about the sounds he wants in his head, and he come up with it and figure out in the studio how to get that sound to sound on that record the way you heard it, you know? Whether it's making the sound with his mouth, recording it into the microphone, figuring out what keys on the keyboard it is, or what it is on his synthesizer or in his DAW that he needs to put, that it comes out and makes that sound exactly what it is, the sound that he's looking for, right? Okay. So when we talk about prolific, when it comes to the music making, to me, I think Tim is a little bit more prolific as far as when it comes to the actual making of the beat and the music, where Dre is different what Timbo is that. When it comes to as far as like being that maestro, being the executive chef in the kitchen per se.
Yes, sir.
That's where he's a step above everybody else, including Timbo. But Timbo, without a shadow of a doubt, to me, creatively, his process is completely out of this world. Timbo and Rodney Jerkins, two R&B producers that are actually about the same when it comes to that type of process. We talk about creatively coming up with the concept of the music up here and then translating them out to what you see in the studio, in the DAW, or wherever else you're playing your beats or anything else like that. That's
Where do
different.
because where do you put Pharrell in that conversation? Then we're gonna take it somewhere else.
I think Pharrell's right there. I mean, to me, I look at Pharrell and Timbo kind of like two sides, like we talked about Biggie and Nas, two sides of the same coin. Pharrell and Timbo are sort of the same thing. Now, here's also the thing about it, though, right? Pharrell with the Neptunes has had a lot of help. With
Chad gets forgotten about.
People don't understand, man. Chad is a bad boy when it comes to the stuff that the Neptunes has done, man.
Thank you.
Like Pharrell gets a lot of the credit that Neptunes has done, man, but Chad.
Thank you.
Chad is a bad boy.
Bad boy.
Over the years, man, my gosh, he's crazy. But that's still not to say that Pharrell, obviously creatively, the same type of process you think about. He's just creatively will come up with those same type of concepts out there. So you got to give him his props as well on that that same wavelength. Shout out to VA, by the way, two VA boys, area doing their thing down there, cooking down there, man. So those two, man, the two in the late 90s and 2000s, man, made some sonically. We talk about some competing with what Dre put out. Sonically, they put out some of the stuff that I think will possibly can compete with what Dre was putting out sonically. Yeah.
B.Cox, we're still on the West Coast. Let's take a trip up north to the Bay real quick.
Okay.
E40 and Too Short, two Bay Area icons. In your opinion, why do you think the longevity has been there for both of those guys? But also, too, why do you think sometimes E40, who's still cranking out great music, great album, his last album is great, by the way, and Too Short still dropping it, why do you think those two Bay Area guys tend to get forgotten? And by some, when it comes to West Coast, because people tend to go straight to LA and they forget about the Bay. I'm like, hold on now.
Yeah. Well, the Bay gets overlooked overall when it comes to West Coast hip hop. When we talk about West Coast hip hop, people go straight to Southern California and the LA area, surrounding area. We forget about the Bay and how many great acts and legendary acts they put out over the years. You talked about 40 and Short. I mean, it's a reason why when they decided to make the group Mount Westmore, why it was Snoop and Q from the South, and from the Bay, you had the two goats there, 40 and Short.
Yes,
I mean,
yes, sir.
They've been carrying the flag for a long time.
Yes, sir.
You go back to some of the other folks, man. Folks like Spice One, Rich, the Loonies.
Oh, come on with it, B.Cox. Mac Dre.
Yeah, Drew Down. I mean, Mac Dre. All these dudes like from the Bay Area, man. Digital Underground.
Richie Rich.
Richie Rich. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Rest in peace to Shock G, man. And Digital Underground, who gave Pac his start. You know what I'm saying? Pac, I mean, to be quite honest, I mean, Pac, when he went out to California, got his start, Marion City, but, he claimed Oakland as his home. He claimed Oakland as his home. And there are lots of other people I'm sure that I'm forgetting about right now. I could even think about Souls of Mischief, Hyro, and Del the Fuck Off, Funky Homo Sapien. That whole clique is all Bay. They still have Hyro Day every year, in that area. So the Bay gets overlooked by Southern California, man, but they got some classic material out there as well. And unfortunately, though, because Southern California it really was, I think Bay Area rap really was more of a niche taste more than anything else. But they were putting out some great music, though, man. You cannot forget about them. Yeah. It's unfortunate, too, though, man, because, I mean, Too Short's been in the game for a long time, put out so many different albums. 40, I feel like, finally got his props probably like around early to mid 2000s, when he started being on everybody's remix and he started putting out those songs and that output started getting eventually then I felt like he finally started getting his props from people for what he had done in the game, man. But those two have been the standard bearers out there, and the Bay has put out great music. We talked about the Loonies. Yuckmouth has put out a lot of great music during that time as well, man, breaking away from what the Loonies did as a group. So shout out to the Bay. They did their work, man. Now it's as recognized as at Southern California, man, but they have done their thing throughout the years. And you can't have a conversation about West Coast hip hop without including the Bay.
Come on,
let's not even talk about the OG, even though people clown them. Let's not even talk about the OG MC Hammer, you know, who everybody in the Bay respects to this day. And everybody will tell you that
Hammer
when
will
it
beat your ass,
this shit, Hammer will mess around and get them shooters on your ass real motherfucking quick.
I say, play with him if you want to. He will get
play
your
with
ass
him if you want to. Right.
Redman told the story. Hammer's not the one to play with.
Man, there was a picture, man. It was back in the day. It had a picture of Snoop, Suge, Pop, and Hammer. And people said on Twitter, low key, they don't even know that the most dangerous nigga in that picture is Hammer.
Definitely. We'll get your ass touched up. B.Cox, is it fair? And I know I'm this is a very man, this is gonna be we're gonna go dive in on the trilogy interview, part 3 of this, but I gotta get this section before we run to the South really quick and wrap this up, man. Pac, is it fair to B.Cox to call him West Coast? Because I don't know if he is who he is without that New York East Coast, Baltimore flavor. But he claims the West, and he only lived 25 damn years.
Yeah.
B.Cox, do you consider him West Coast? I don't want. Is he just universal? I don't want nowhere to put Pac.
This is the thing to me. Pac is more of a universal artist to me, right?
That's what I got. That's
on the last episode, the last interview that he gave, and you find it on YouTube, is that he said the reason why he was saying before he died, last interview he gave to some cat, he said,
was it Sway?
When it came to I don't think it was Sway, it was some random journalist though, like just got an interview from him, and it's like a 30-something minute long interview. And Pac said the reason why he was trying to come out with the One Nation thing so heavily is because he literally was the link. He was literally the link between the West Coast and the East Coast, because he had peoples in both cities, because he literally grew up on both coasts. You know, he spent majority of his life, the majority of his childhood and adolescence in New York, and then went to Baltimore. Then right before he finished high school, he moves out to California. He gets his start as an artist, roadieing for Digital Underground, eventually gets his start out there by working with them. And then he comes up basically under the wings of a lot of these West Coast artists, but then he has a connection with all these folks on the East Coast. Treacherous Boy from Naughty by Nature, Boot Camp Click, Buckshot, and Smith and Wesson, Greg Nice, guys like that, Eric B from Eric B and Rakim. These guys, the dudes from Wu-Tang, Method Man and Redman, all his folks, they all are cool with each other, right? But then he comes up with the West Coast, right? So he had all his folks there in Oakland that he came up with that saw him basically start from the beginning to be a roadie to eventually become a star by himself. He claimed Oakland as his home, but to me, Pac is more universal than anything else because he was the bridge between the East Coast and the West Coast, shit, nigga was born in East Harlem and lived there till he was like 13 or 14 years old.
Wait a second, because the nigga was born right there in Harlem, man. Shit.
He was born and raised in East Harlem. He talked about it on Me Against the World, and he gave the song on Me Against the World called Old School, man. He talks about him he talked about his days of growing up in New York and what it was like to grow up in New York on Me Against the World. He ain't come out and start talking about West Side this. He didn't come out and start talking about West Coast this, West Coast that until after he got signed to Death Row and he was out on bail. He wasn't throwing no W's up in his music and when he was around before he actually signed to Death Row. So he's more of a universal artist more than anything else, because he was the dude that if you got sides beefing in the party, he was cool with everybody. His beefs were with certain people. That's what people have to understand. Pac's beef was not with all of New York and all East Coast rappers. His beef was with 3 or 4 people, right? That's who he had a problem with. And it grew after a little while. He had more problems with other people, but, he had problems with certain people. But as he said during that interview expertly, he was the bridge between the East Coast and the West Coast. He was the guy that helped to bring them together. And that's what I think he was working on before he died. So we'll never know. We'll never know. But the West Coast claims him, right? New York don't claim him, but the West Coast claims him. And so that is what it is. But to me, he's a universal artist because he really tied the sensibilities of both coasts together, because he learned the game out there before he even got to California.
Damn right he did.
Yeah.
Well said, because we're gonna wrap it up in the South.
Okay.
This Outkast.
Mhm.
Are they the greatest hip hop group of all time, B.Cox?
I have to say yes. And the reason why I say yes is because you just got to look at their catalog. And like, no disrespect to Wu-Tang, no disrespect to Tribe Called Quest, who was my favorite hip hop group of all time. But when you look at Outkast's catalog, you can just go through from the first one all the way through the last one they put out. Where are you finding the catalog that competes with that? Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music, classic. AT Aliens, classic. Aquemini, classic. Stankonia, most people will say is a classic. Some will say it's maybe just a step below, but incredible nonetheless. Speaker Box, Love Below, incredible album, and an album that did something that many hip hop albums don't do, and winning the album of the year. You know, Diamond album. Lots of folks will even say that's a classic, and even if they don't say it's a classic, it's an essential album that has many classic tracks on it, or classic-worthy tracks on it. Even if you get to the very last album in their discography, which was Idlewild, that's the weak link in their discography. An album like Idlewild. And then look at the tracks that they had on Idlewild that were hits. The Mighty O, Morris Brown, Hollywood Divorce. I mean, so they had some hits there too. If you look at the catalog, you have the argument to say yes. Because how do you come out of the gate, your first 4 albums, and put out classics? And then how do you start being produced solely by Organized Noise to moving into, by the time you get to your last album, you're handling the majority of the production yourself. And you still got the Dungeon Fam folks, Organized Noise, producing a couple of tracks here and there. But by the time they got to Stankonia, we're producing most of this shit ourselves. And you got to look at the quality of the work, man. And nobody's going to argue that. If you look at groups, I mean, look at any other group's catalog, right? Who has sustained success that they've had for as many albums as they've had? And if you look at the time period, it's not a long time period. 1994 to 2006, 12 years. Let's look at the other groups and other contenders in there, right? Okay, so we'll even start with Public Enemy. Public Enemy will go back in the day. Public Enemy, yeah, they had a couple of classic albums. To me, Take a Nation is to Hold Us Back and Fear of a Black Planet, at least in my opinion. Okay. You go and look at Wu-Tang. You have Forever. You have Enter 36 Chambers. A Tribe Called Quest. You have first 3 albums are probably considered classics. Definitely the middle 2 with Low End Theory and Midnight Marauders are undisputable classics. Okay. Mobb Deep got a nice little run there with Infamous, Murder Music, and Hell on Earth. You got a nice little run right there. Mm-hmm. How many other groups you saying really got the cachet to stand up next to Outkast's catalog? No. Not a lot. No. Those are the groups I named right there. Okay, maybe Run DMC. Okay, a few of their songs. Okay, maybe. But who has the quality of Outkast music catalog as a group? Nobody. And people will say Wu-Tang because of all the MCs that they had. Yeah, but man, those 2 albums they put out, I named those classics. Yeah, after that, that's a little, it's a little. You ain't got that with Outkast. Outkast literally went out on top of their game. And they literally broke up because one of them ain't really want to rap no more. Let's be honest. Because Big Boy was still recording music after they decided to break up. And he put out great music after they broke up.
Big Boy kept getting better and better and better and better and better.
Oh, yeah. 100%. But to start from the beginning, from Southern Playalistic,
come on,
to get all the way down to Speaker Box Love Below, I mean, the transformation, first of all, artistically is amazing, right? It's crazy. The concepts that they come up. Each one of the albums a different concept. Southern Playalistic, one type of concept. AT Aliens, crazy concept. Aquemini, crazy concept. Stankonia, crazy. Then you get Speaker Box and Love Below with the duality of the 2. I mean, I don't think there's a catalog group-wise that can stand up with Outkast. I think they have it. Now, you can argue about you want to put the quality of their albums up against some of the group's best albums, and we can have a conversation about that, man. But the prolonged success with the catalogs, if we're talking about out of 10, right? And if we want to talk about some out of all the albums they put out, let's say even the Source Mic system, if the lowest album they have is a 3.5, maybe 4 out of all those albums, and the rest are either 5 or 4.5. Come on, man. What are we really talking about here? And
because what are we really talking about, people?
And that's the frustrating thing about it, is because I felt like they had a lot more in the tank to go.
They did. I thought they did too.
That's what's frustrating about it. They had a lot more in the tank to go, and there's nothing afterwards. But if you're gonna go out like that. I would have been fine them going out after Speakerboxxx Love Below, to be quite honest. But that's what it is. But I mean, and for all intents and purposes, to me, that's their last album. I mean, Idlewild is more so tied in. It's like a thing for the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, that you get an Outkast greatest hits out, truly greatest hits out, and you got a double disc of cuts on there, and they're coming up on the 30-year anniversary of their debut album this year with something playalistic as well. Crazy. I mean, 30 years we looked at what Outkast has done in music, and we're talking about now close to 18 years after they've put out their last album, and we're still looking at their catalog as bar none one of the best, if not the best.
B.Cox, we're gonna end it in Atlanta, brother. Brother, I can't even. I don't know how you come up with all this stuff. Where, B.Cox?
I just love music, man. I love music, and I love to read, and I'm fascinated about the way how things are done. And when you love things like the way I love them, you try to learn as much as you can about them. And I'm a fan, man. I'm a fan that loves to learn everything I can about it, the things that I love. And that's all it is, man. I love music. I love hip hop. I love Black culture, everything related toward the music of Black culture. I'm into it, and I'm sold in it. So, that's the reason why I do what I do. Is why I do the vote, man, because I want to sit there and look at the albums we've listened to over the years and see whether or not some of these things still stand up after years, man. Do we still truly have classics after 20, 25, and 30 years? That's why I do what I do, because that's when the debate really starts.
B.Cox, I'm gonna end it with a controversial one, man. But I'm gonna fuck it, man. Fuck it. I'm gonna have to end this with motherfucking controversial. Fuck it, man. I fuck it. We're gonna put the rap down.
Okay.
How can you ever, anyone, it may be because I'm a homer, but B.Cox, it is impossible to do an R&B and without talking about R. Kelly, man. How do you feel, B.Cox, when people try to omit R. Kelly? I'll tell anybody. It's my question to you, B.Cox.
Yeah.
I have said, find me somebody in a fucking versus. Unless you go dig up maybe Michael Jackson a little bit. Find me somebody. Hit the hit that he's made, he's wrote, he's produced. As my brother B.Cox told y'all what a producer is.
Yeah.
The executive chef of that fucking meal.
Yeah.
Where do you rank R. Kelly all time, his contribution to the game, and can he be omitted from the conversation, Evan? We're gonna fucking end it on this type of shit.
So let's just talk about the music, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm just going to talk about the music at face value. That's what I want everyone to understand. I'm talking about R. Kelly music face value.
You're just talking about the music, not the man, not the person.
Music wise, I mean, it's as impressive as a resume as anybody who's existed in the last 40 years or so of music. It's something. I mean, what he's done, the music that he's done personally for himself, what he's produced of other people, and just him being able to put together this music, and also now learn out the fact that the dude doesn't really know how to read or write. It's amazing that he's done that. That he's crafted these songs and written them for himself and so many different other people. I mean, he's given us so many different hits, and I would venture to say, at least by my count, maybe at least 3 classic albums, if not 4. At least 4. That's what I'm thinking about. 4.
I got 4.
4. Okay, so we're on the same wavelength then. Okay, so I'm thinking, just so for everybody's mind, 12 Play, the R, TP2 and Chocolate.
Definitely classic.
Yeah, TP2 and Chocolate Factory.
Come on,
Yeah,
talk to
yeah.
me.
So, I mean, it's amazing, incredible. That, like you said, if there was versus and he was able to be in one, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody from his generation that could go hit for hit with him. The one person that I think that maybe would stand a chance as far as with hits is concerned would maybe be Usher. Maybe be Usher. So, but in your second question, can he be omitted from the conversation? Well, whether he should or shouldn't be, I think is kind of irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that he is. Whether it's fair or not, in regards to other people historically in music, what they have done and them not being great people. I mean, yeah, if we're going to go by that measuring stick, is it fair? Probably not, but we can't use that as a measuring stick, unfortunately. And, you know, it is unfortunate for the people that he's victimized throughout his career. And it's unfortunate for him because he really tarnished what would have been one of the greatest musical legacies that would have existed in this part of the 20th century, man. You know, it's really a tragedy for his victims, but for himself, he did himself a disservice for him and all of his fans because nobody will remember your music now. They'll remember what you did now. And that's a tragedy in itself, separate from the devastating things he's done to his victims. And I'll leave it at that.
Well said, B.Cox. My whole take on it is that, from him, just from a musical standpoint, the man's contributions to music can never be, in my humble opinion, forgotten. You can never forget his music. Now, I'm not absolving the man for what he's been charged with. That's egregious, and there's no excuse. And we do not on this channel, myself or B.Cox, condone any of that. But strictly objectively from the music, I can separate the sins of the man from his act, from his contribution as an artist. One of the greatest pure artists of our era and our generation.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you guys have just got blessed with my brother B.Cox, the music maven, the hip hop savant, the national treasure. Man, with episode 2, we're gonna do a trilogy soon. We're gonna get more into Pac. We're gonna talk about Eminem. We're gonna get real deep.
I'm with it.
We're gonna get really deep. B.Cox, is there anything you want the people to know? Any projects coming up, man, so they can follow you? Make sure you shout everything out, brother. So we got
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, brother, for having me once again. It's always a pleasure being in Cigar Chats and talking it up with you, man. It's always great to have this conversation. It's therapy for me, really is.
Really?
But make sure that y'all absolutely, man. Yeah, man. I always love talking about what I love, man. It helps to take the stink away from my day, you know what I'm saying, and from life and the pressures you go through. So, man, everybody who's out there, man, if you like the content, you like what you hear here, make sure you go to the website of the podcast, man, Vault Classic Music Reviews Podcast, which is vaultclassicpod.com. Once again, that's vaultclassicpod.com. And if you're going on social media, it's all social media handles on Threads, Twitter, or AKA X, Facebook, YouTube at Vault Classic Pod. It's at Vault Classic Pod. And as far as things that we have coming up, I mean, we got a few reviews coming up in the tank. I mean, we did earlier, like not too long ago, as I was recording, did a 30th anniversary of Above the Rim, the soundtrack in the movie. We got reviews coming up for a few albums you'll remember. Of course, we're doing a 30-year reflection of Illmatic and also a Southern Playalistic Cadillac music. We got a lot of reviews coming up. The Brat Functified, a few different other albums coming up that I'm trying to recall off the top of my head, man. But we got a lot of great reviews and even some lives coming up too. So make sure that y'all check that out. But make sure you stay tapped in vaultclassicpod.com and at Vault Classic Pod on all social media channels. The podcast you can find on anywhere you can find podcasts. Just go to the website and you can click on your podcast host of choice and you will find it there. Other than that, man, make sure y'all stay tapped in and tuned in so that you don't miss nothing.
Well, you guys just heard it. B.Cox is he's not a friend. He's a family member of the show. So you guys will be seeing him constantly coming back. Cause I mean, I just love to hear him break things down. I tee it up for him. I'm just Gary Payton. He's Sean Kemp. I just throw him the goddamn lob from half court and B.Cox catching it and windmilling it on y'all asses. So,
I appreciate
it. For run these numbers up. Go support my brother B.Cox and get ready. We're gonna give y'all a trilogy. Sometime in between spring and summer, we're gonna be back with part 3 of the trilogy. B.Cox and Mac. God bless y'all. Cigar Chaps and Mac. We out.